Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning.
This is the day that people across the region and around the world have been working, striving, hoping, and praying for. They have done things over the last month that I think were really unthinkable.
President Trump presses world leaders to ensure the truce between Israel and Hamas turns into a lasting peace after Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners are released in historic scenes. Risk sentiment in the markets improves, but raging beneath the surface of short-term fluctuations is the great debasement debate. And tariff standoff. Presidents Trump and Xi locked in a showdown, with both countries claiming the ball is now in the other's court as the clock ticks towards a further escalation in import tariffs. Well, it's just gone 8 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Versace in Dubai. What a pivotal day for the region yesterday. In a short while, we're going to talk about ramifications and what happens next after President Trump's whirlwind trip to Israel and to Egypt later on in the day. But for now, let's just take a look back at markets, because yesterday we did actually see a more upbeat end for Wall Street indices. By the end of the day, we had the S&P closing up 1.6%, NASDAQ up 2.2%, so almost fully recuperating the losses that came to be on Friday afternoon when President Trump put out that tweet about China. I should also mention that chip makers continue to do really well as well in the U.S. session, jumping almost 5% yesterday. And basically anything that OpenAI or NVIDIA touch also are soaring. Yesterday, Broadcom jumped 10% after inking a deal with OpenAI, and then other companies also discussing alliances with NVIDIA also jumped yesterday too. So that tells you that the AI theme is still pretty intact. This morning, though, S&P futures not doing a whole lot. We're trading sideways. The handover from Asia Pacific slightly more cautious. We have that broad index down about 0.5%. And then the USD also not doing a whole lot here, though actually in the past couple of days we have seen some stabilization come through for the greenback. And then 10-year yields back online again after being closed for Columbus Day. We are up a couple of basis points today. So 4.05 is where we're at. But in the headlines, you may have heard me talk about this great debasement trade. It's a very fancy way of saying that people are moving away from fiat currencies, away from currencies and bonds into gold and silver. So let's just switch over. And here's a great manifestation of the debasement trade and exactly what that means. So effectively what you're seeing here is what's the price action that you've witnessed in gold percentage terms versus fiat currencies. And you can see there, it's quite obvious that gold and also silver have been outperforming how fiat and sovereign currencies have been doing this year. Many heavyweights in the industry are saying that gold is a safer harbor than the USD and US Treasuries these days. So it explains some of the move that we're seeing in gold. Now, to our top story. President Trump returning to the White House after a visit to Israel and Egypt, where he pressed world leaders to ensure the U.S.-led truce between Israel and Hamas turns into a lasting peace. The 20 surviving Israeli hostages were released by Hamas early Monday, just before Trump arrived in the region, marking the end of 2 years in captivity. Hamas also agreed to release the remains of all dead captives. Around the same time, Israel started releasing almost 2,000 jailed Palestinians from its prisons, sparking jubilant scenes across the West Bank and Gaza.
Mr. President, you are committed to this peace. I am committed to this peace. And together, Mr. President, we will achieve this peace.
In his address to Israel's Knesset, Trump declared the war in Gaza is over and then traveled to Egypt to attend a signing ceremony marking the peace deal.
Pleased to announce that numerous countries of great wealth and power and dignity have come forward to me just today and over the last week to say they want to help in the reconstruction of Gaza, putting up whatever money is necessary. And the money is, of course, it's a lot of money, but it's not much compared to the value or the wealth of these tremendous countries.
Well, to discuss yesterday's historic scenes and the path forward, Israel's ambassador to the UAE, Yossi Shelley, joins us right now. Good morning to you, Mr. Ambassador. We just heard there President Trump. I mean, he said it many times yesterday. He wants to ensure that this truce between Israel and Hamas does actually turn into lasting peace. Do you believe that there is enough in this 20-point peace plan for that to actually happen? Could this time really be different?
Good morning, Joanna. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Yes, I think this time everybody saw that all the Arab world was involved in this agreement. So nobody was out of it. Even Turkey got inside, what we call the Muslim world, part of the Muslim world. So even in the Knesset yesterday, when Prime Minister Netanyahu said, we finish with the war, let's go for peace. I think always Israel seeks for peace, and with the help, of course, the huge help of America, Donald Trump, of course, we arrived to a moment, I think, that it will be irreversible.
The King Abdullah, the King of Jordan, sat down in an interview yesterday, and he actually said, the Middle East is doomed unless there is a peace process leading to the creation of a Palestinian state. Now, the latest polling suggests that the Israeli public, as of now, is overwhelmingly against the idea of the formation of a Palestinian state. Can there actually be lasting peace without a two-state solution?
Look, you know what's the problem with politicians and people? They want now everything now. First, we finish this war, the 2 years war, and since, let's say, since the creation of Israel, the wars from 48 until today, war. We did an agreement with Egypt, with Jordan. So now the Palestinian Authority have to take the torch and to emphasize and that everybody will see that the terror passed. You know, still today the PLO, the PA is financing people that murder Jews, even those people that you call prisoners. They are not prisoners. They are murderers that murder innocent people. And so the first change, you cannot in one day say, you know, if you ask me in 10 years, 50 years, can we arrive to something that everything, wow, Palestinians said? Maybe. It depends on the other part. Israel do all our best. We never seek for wars. We try, even the last war with the Hamas, the war was waged on us, and let's hope. You cannot go to the point from today for tomorrow. It's a long distance, what we call marathon.
Earlier on, you were talking about the participation of some of the Arab states, and obviously many of them were represented yesterday at the Gaza signing ceremony. Looking back, was Israel's attack on Doha a miscalculation? Was it a mistake? Or would you say that it actually accelerated the momentum around getting to this 20-point peace plan?
If you see to the facts, it looks like accelerated. But let's not forget, the Prime Minister can say that countries cannot harbor terrorists, and they live like nothing happened. They send others, they give orders, they kill people, they intervene in the negotiation, and they say stand still. Does it sound to anybody normal? So the attack not was on Qatar, even that it was in the state of, in the country of Qatar, but it wasn't a terrorist. They were sitting there, and sometimes things hope, you know, regarding the what's past, it looks like it helps. But what's important is the agreement that was signed yesterday in Sharm el-Sheikh, and now we have a pattern to go to what everybody is seeking for. Let's see the step. We passed the first step. Now we have to get the dead bodies, the soldiers and citizens that are still kept there, and we continue step by step. A bloodshed conflict cannot finish in one day by signing a document. We have to have some check and balance all the way, and to see that everyone means peace and economic and prosperity.
Now, you are the Israeli ambassador to the UAE. The UAE, obviously, a signatory to the Abraham Accords. Do you believe now that the Gaza war, at least for the time being, there appears to be a truce and the war is ostensibly over? Do you believe that the UAE may formally invite the Israeli Prime Minister for a visit?
I think it's obvious. Look, when there are obstacles, war, you know, the Arab world is in conflict. People don't like to embrace Israel. I think that it will arrive. Let's see that that the Hamas will eliminate it. It will be disarmed. We start the construction, not we, you know, this committee with Tony Blair and head with Donald Trump will start to construct, to build, education. I think things will come. It's and even the last, you know, the last peace sign yesterday in Sharm el-Sheikh, approximately even Mr. Netanyahu, the prime minister, should be there, but we have some holidays, religious holiday, and he couldn't arrive. So his appearance is not something like, wow, surprise. It will be.
Okay, what happens to the Israeli prime minister from here? Many of his political opponents in the run-up, obviously, to yesterday had been calling for new elections, calling for his resignation over the perceived mishandling of the war and what has ensued since October 7. Yesterday, in a remarkable comment, the U.S. president waded into the debates and actually joked that maybe the Israeli prime minister should receive a pardon. What do you see as the Israeli prime minister's political future here?
The prime minister, even that I'm not dealing with politics, but the polls and what people are thinking now after the agreement, it looks like Prime Minister Netanyahu will continue on. Always the people that lose, you know, there is always a position. We can say their work is to be against. Even that in this case, everybody should be happy, and I think that everybody was happy. You saw it yesterday in the Knesset, opposition, coalition, all were happy and were clapping hands to everybody. And I think it's day to come to see the people. What's count in Israel is only the people. They'll go to vote. I think the election will be in the next November. Usually they start in June, next June. So I think the result will be shown, and we can talk about it again.
Israel's ambassador to the UAE, Yossi Shelley, thank you so much for joining our show today. Now, still to come, U.S.-China trade tensions appear to be easing, but our next guest thinks markets are not pricing enough uncertainty. We speak to Capital Link CEO Brett McGonegal next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Bersachi in Dubai. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says he still expects Presidents Trump and Xi to meet at this month's APEC summit in Korea. This comes despite China's move to tighten exports of rare earths and Trump's threat of 100% additional tariffs on Chinese imports. Bessent told Fox Business that all options are open for retaliating against China's decision and that the U.S. will not let Beijing's export restrictions stand. U.S. equity futures pointing to a higher open today, while Treasuries has slipped as risk sentiment improves somewhat. Actually, well, you can see their futures are now slipping, but only marginally down 0.2%. We had a better close for Wall Street. Joining us now is Brett McGonegal, CEO of Capital Link, who argues that stock markets are not pricing in much of the lingering uncertainty. So apparently you are arguing that, Brett. You know, it's very difficult to define where we are in this process, right? Because you had several stages of market reaction. And there was an interesting column up by John Authors about, you know, the beginning of the year, people are excited. Then you had the scare of Liberation Day. Then you had the taco trade theme. Where are we now in terms of the market narrative?
Look, unfortunately, the markets, you know, they reset almost 24 hours. So the tendency in the flow of capital right now is moving towards headlines. And, you know, we have a president in the U.S. that makes headlines every day. Yes. And that's driving markets. And I think we're trying to find some sort of norm, and the norm is going to be geopolitical. Yeah. So until we get some real cooperation between the U.S. and China, and it looks like it can be lasting and it looks like it's agreed upon, I think you're going to see a lot of ebbs and flows, but I still think that we're kind of bumping against bottoms that keep getting higher.
Yeah, and the thing is, one of our guests on the show yesterday pointed out U.S. and China both have very strong points of leverage. With China, it's rare earths. They can control, they can restrict. Yep. The U.S. is market access. So how do you see it playing out between the two sides in terms of where we eventually end up?
So, look, I think that there's going to be a meeting in Seoul.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of things playing in the background. And unfortunately, us as viewers, we only see what happens, what's delivered in the headlines. But I think there's a lot of negotiating that's going on behind the scenes. I don't think there is any sort of the acrimony that the headlines portend, I don't think exists. I think that's staged, that's politics. We also have to remember that in this time when everything is accessible through social media, politicians are always campaigning, no matter where they are.
Yeah.
To think that Xi is not playing to his base is wrong. To think that Trump is not playing to his base. So maybe there's a reason why Friday happened ahead of what Trump delivered yesterday. So if you think about this, this is
You're seeing a connection between the Friday post and Trump's visit to the Middle East region.
Yeah, so I think
that
he set a baseline that played to his idea Friday, that he's going to fight, that he's going to make sure the U.S. gets what they deserve in any sort of a trade negotiation with China, knowing that he was walking into a stage on Monday or Tuesday that completely paints him into a different light. So let's think about how you actually look at staging and how people think about what they're saying and why they're saying it. As I said, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We only see what happens when they step at the podium. But a lot of this stuff is very premeditated and thought out because there's strategies about how diplomacy works.
Yeah.
You know, I said in my piece to you, diplomacy is about words.
Yeah.
You have to choose them wisely.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, you could argue that he didn't necessarily pick his words yesterday, but, you know, he definitely had a stage.
Yeah.
What do you think President Trump's visit to the region actually then means as far as those geopolitical considerations are concerned with China?
So
it's just sort of reasserted the U.S.'s presence in the region?
100%. But I also think that the thing that people aren't focused on is it resets the conversation between Trump and Xi. And what do I mean by that? So, yes, he has reasserted himself in the region. The region at one point was looking like it was pointing to China. And the region looked like China influence may be at the table to get a negotiation done in the war. That's gone. No one has heard China's name in the past 3 or 4 days in the lead up of, you know, Trump was on saying many nations have come forward. You know, obviously 4 kind of led the negotiations, but there were others in the background that were critical. If you think about it, there hasn't been one mention of China. Now, what does that do to Trump's leverage? I think this puts things right back into his kind of sweet spot where he has now come to the region. He said something that people thought was impossible. He did so in a day where he went to Israel, he went to Egypt. He set the tone, and everybody came and lined up behind him.
Yeah,
so
quite literally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's really fascinating. But let me just maybe ask quite a simplistic question, which is, isn't most of the action anyway in the U.S. around the AI theme? You know, around anything that OpenAI touches. At the top of the show, I was saying that anything NVIDIA touches, they're all buying stakes in each other and doing partnerships with each other.
Look,
I mean,
this thing is unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this. I think that people try to draw parallels to the dot-com boom and bust. I will tell you, I think it's quite different. And the reason it's different is because the companies that are making commitments to one another, and people are calling this a circular economy, you know, you often see that power strip with the cord plugged back into it like it's just a big circle. This is different this time. I don't necessarily, I wouldn't advise that this is the way that the theme moves forward. However, the companies that are marrying each other have a tremendous amount of firepower. They have huge revenues. They have a lot of money behind them. This isn't paper trading like it was in the dot-com era. So I think the AI theme is not played out. I think it's heavy. I think it's overwhelming. I think that we're going to see something come back from it. And I think the fringe players will get blown out of the water. And I think people are paying too high a price to be on the fringe. But I think if you're looking down the middle, and remember, the stock market has come to 6 or 7 stocks. If you look in those names, those companies are getting more powerful. They can have some sort of slippage and still move forward. The ones on the periphery, I think it could be disastrous.
Winners and losers, like any cycle. Brett, thank you so much. Fascinating discussion. Brett McGonegal, Capital Link CEO. And coming up, a crisis in Madagascar. The president seeks sanctuary in a secure location after weeks of deadly anti-government protests. Details next. This is Bloomberg. Madagascar's president says he has sought sanctuary in a secure location because of a threat to his life following weeks of anti-government demonstrations. The president didn't disclose where he's gone, but in a social media post said he was overseeing the delivery of power generators, suggesting he has left the country. For more, Bloomberg's McGonegal joins us now. Well, this is quite a fascinating development in Madagascar. What do we know about the leader's whereabouts?
Good morning, Jumana. So yesterday, speculation was rife that the president had actually fled the country, but there was no official communication. He was scheduled to do a national address later in the evening at about 7 p.m. And when that kept being pushed forward, then tension was beginning to rise. And in a Facebook Live address, he confirmed that he had actually fled the country in order to protect his life. And what he's saying is that there's an attempt on his life, and this is a plot by the military and several politicians. And so he took a helicopter to an island, and then he was evacuated to a safe location with the help of French military. Many were expecting him to actually announce his resignation, but just like he said he's still in charge and he's still running the country. But then how is he doing that? Because he dissolved government. He's only named 3 ministers in the new administration. The prime minister that he named did not really go well with the people. The military has revolted against him. They've announced that they are now in charge, particularly the CAPSAT unit. And also people are against him. The opposition is saying they're going to table a motion against him. So he's really in a tough spot.
And how did these protests snowball into calls for the president's resignation?
Jumana, for context, Madagascar is a very poor country. 3 out of 4 people live in poverty, and 2/3 of the country do not have access to electricity. And this is some of the issues that led to that protest. They were protesting electricity shortage, water shortage. But in 4 weeks, it became something bigger. It became about cost of living. It became about unemployment. It became about corruption in the country. And this is some of the factors that led people to go out in the streets. And the turning point was when CAPSAT, a military unit, joined them. And now things have escalated far beyond what the president had ever imagined.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you for bringing us up to speed on that story. Bloomberg's McGonegal in Kigali, Rwanda. And coming up, President Trump presses world leaders to ensure the U.S.-led truce between Israel and Hamas becomes a lasting peace. We'll have more on that peace summit in Egypt next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. President Trump presses world leaders to ensure the truce between Israel and Hamas turns into a lasting peace after Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners are released in historic scenes. Risk sentiment in the markets improves, but raging beneath the surface of short-term fluctuations is the great debasement debate. And tariff standoff. Presidents Trump and Xi locked in a showdown, with both countries claiming the ball is now in the other's court as the clock ticks towards a further escalation in import tariffs. It's just gone 8:30 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Johannesburg in Dubai. Well, we actually had a better close for Wall Street yesterday. Both the S&P and the Nasdaq ending up in the green, almost fully recuperating Friday's losses now. But once again, AI in the driving seat. The chip makers soared yesterday, up 5%. Broadcom also rallying 10% after OpenAI announced a stake there. So as we've been speaking on the show, all of these chip makers and any company that seems to be forming alliances with OpenAI or with NVIDIA still seem to be soaring. AI theme still intact in the U.S. Today, though, what we're seeing is futures are starting to slip. We started off steady, but now we're coming down a little bit, down 0.4%, perhaps taking their cue from the handover from some of these Asian indices. the MSCI Asia Pacific Index now down 1%. So cautiousness prevailing over there. We'll talk about that more in a moment. The USD trading flat, though there has been a theme of stabilization just in the last week or so and into and around the shutdown. The USD has actually done okay, despite the fact it's down more than 9% year to date. And then 10-year yields back in action again. We're up. Well, actually, now we're flattish as the markets have turned around, but essentially still holding in at 4.04, getting very close to breaking through 4%. Switching over then, I mean, this is a theme we've been talking about pretty much every day over the past month, which is that gold keeps soaring, silver as well, squeezing higher and making all-time record highs. And this you can see quite clearly. The move is almost vertical in the last couple of weeks. So there's been an acceleration of money going into that space. And this is just the percentage change over the course of the year. Really phenomenal. Silver is up 80% now, 79.8 to be precise. And then gold also up 56%. So just really stellar moves. And all of that has happened in the last couple of months. So let's get more on the market action with our Markets Live strategist, Mark Cranfield. I want to ask you about what's been going on with gold and silver. But actually, first, let's just draw on the price action overnight. And why, despite the fact that Wall Street rallied into the close yesterday, there's still some cautiousness out of these Asia-Pacific indices?
We've just had a whole set of headlines coming out of China. They are about to issue sanctions on shipping-related companies. They've cited 5 specific companies related to US shipping activity. That came just before the lunch break started in the Hong Kong market. So you're seeing particular negativity in Japan because the Nikkei and the Topix Index are still running at this time, and also Korea as well. So when Chinese markets reopen after the lunch break, you can expect it to be pretty weak there. So investors are they're already edgy because they're going to have to wait longer to see whether President Xi and President Trump will actually meet at this APEC summit. And now they've been hit with what appears to be almost like a retaliation from China to some of the measures which America announced last week. So that's really making people very edgy, and that's part of the reason why you're seeing S&P futures extending the losses over the past hour or so.
Yeah, and just in reference to your comments, obviously those came through a short while ago. China sanctioning 5 U.S.-related firms, curbs on 5 of Hanwha's ocean U.S. units. So that has been the headline, I guess, that's driving the price action. Mark, the bigger theme, I guess, that's also being talked about a lot on the terminal today is this great debasement debate and the fact that there's seemingly, evidently, there is a shift of investors outside, away from fiat currencies, away from investing in currencies and sovereign bonds, into what they think are safer harbor assets like gold and silver. Is this actually happening, or are we trying to justify some of the price action in gold and silver over the last couple of weeks?
I think to an extent it's not too difficult to understand when so many major currencies have issues which are making them look weaker than probably they would do on a long-term basis. So if you take the US dollar, a lot of people think there is self-harm being done to the value of the dollar by some of the actions of the US administration. Then you take the Japanese yen, we have a pretty much close to political crisis going on here in Japan, where they are having difficulty finding a prime minister. Even though Takaishi was voted in as the leader of the LDP, she's having a lot of trouble forming an alliance with other people. So at the moment, it's not even certain that she'll be elected as prime minister in Japan. And then you look at Europe, France, they've had a prime minister who came and went, and they still can't decide on how to get around their budget as well. So if you take those, that means that the euro is being undermined, the Japanese yen is being undermined, and the US dollar as well. The 3 biggest currencies in the world. So when you don't really have a positive story for any major currency, it's no wonder that people will look at silver, gold, and other alternatives. They may even look at some of the cryptocurrencies as well. But it's really a side effect of when you have problems in the most major of currencies, people losing faith in them. It's where they would start to go to other places. And of course, central banks are leading that charge because they also feel they're underweight in terms of alternatives to major currencies. It doesn't look as though it's going to end anytime soon because none of those countries appear to have a clear plan on how to bring in their fiscal deficits and get things back on track.
Yeah. Well, I've thought of an acronym, TNAG. There is no alternative to gold. What do you think, Mark? Is it going to catch?
Pretty good, yeah. You should patent it.
I'll try to do so. Mark Cranfield, thank you so much. All right, let's turn to regional politics. After giving an address to the Israeli Knesset, President Trump flew to a peace summit in Sharm el-Sheikh. There, he pressed world leaders on Gaza's future to ensure the U.S.-led truce between Israel and Hamas turns into a lasting peace. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declined Trump's invitation to attend. And for more, we're now joined by Stuart Livingstone-Wallace, our head of Middle East and North Africa, and Bloomberg's Dan Williams in Jerusalem. Well, I mean, it has been a dizzying 24 hours. Stuart, I'm going to start with you with the Gaza peace signing ceremony. I mean, there was a lot going on there. A lot of it was spectacle, handshakes, aggressive handshakes with the leaders, a lineup of all the leaders with photos, customized compliments for various leaders. But ultimately, what substance did we actually get out of this ceremony?
Well, it's going to be very hard to tell. I think it signaled a willingness, and the fact that, as Trump pointed out, so many world leaders decided to basically drop everything and head to Sharm el-Sheikh at very, very short notice, I think tells you something about the goodwill that's out there. Now, I think those of us that have been following the story for some time are somewhat cautious about declaring that the war is over, whether we're talking about Gaza or the Middle East more generally. But again, I think there was a signal yesterday that there is at least a willingness to try and resolve it and move forward. Yeah.
Dan, let me just ask you also about the Knesset speech. It happened after our show yesterday. It was a remarkable speech, and a good chunk of it also was dedicated to thanking the various people who helped get this peace deal across the line. How has that speech gone down within the Israeli public, and also the fact that President Trump did something that was quite remarkable, in that he commented on Israeli domestic politics as well, and at one point quipped that the Israeli Prime Minister should receive a pardon?
Indeed, it was a very significant speech. It was the crowning event for many Israelis of a very significant day, a day that, as far as many of them are concerned, really draws the line under the war, the beginning of the end of the war, if not the end of the war, if not the hoped for peace, because Trump clearly felt at home, and he was treated like a hero on his homecoming, or making a victory lap, having been the one who brought over the line this ambitious deal, or at least the first stage of this ambitious deal, the ceasefire, which now appears open-ended, while so long as the implementation of the ensuing clauses doesn't happen. As for his call for Netanyahu to be pardoned, this appears to have surprised everyone in the room, perhaps not Netanyahu, but certainly the Speaker of the Parliament, who is a Netanyahu ally from his party, and potentially even the President of Israel, to whom it was addressed. Now, a lot lies between that call by Trump and the actual heavy lifting in terms of Israeli procedure and law for a pardon to take place. But I think the Israeli leader might be banking now. He's a man who still wants to stay in politics, possibly, and very likely to run again to extend his already record-long tenure in an election scheduled for next year. He has been dealing for several years now with this long-running trial, corruption trial. He denies wrongdoing. And I think now there is some impetus, there is some momentum gathering among some Israelis, perhaps not a majority yet, for finding a way to remove that trial from the public discourse, because he will be regarded, certainly by supporters, but perhaps more widely in Israel, as someone who, despite being in charge when the October 7th attack happened 2 years ago, that attack which blindsided Israel and set off this war, someone who's managed very ably to turn the tables around, both in Gaza and regionally.
Yeah. Stuart, there is a story up on Bloomberg today about the hard work that comes next. And yesterday, I mean, in typical Trump-esque fashion, there was a lot of hyperbole, but it was a massive achievement. It was a huge, huge day for the region. I thought it's really interesting the fact that President Trump kept referring to world leaders, and that world leaders, alongside Israel and Hamas, need to ensure that this truce turns into a fully fledged peace deal. What role is the international community actually going to play in ensuring that this 20-piece-point plan actually gets implemented?
So, I mean, I think a couple of key points. One is you have that international pressure, but also you potentially have boots on the ground. And while the US is deploying, I think, something like 200 personnel within Israel to monitor the ceasefire, they have no intention of actually going into Gaza itself. So that probably has to be an international force. Number two, money. it is going to cost an enormous amount of money to rebuild Gaza. I mean, let alone clearing the rubble, then you have to start again. That money has to come from somewhere, and I think the hope is that a lot of that will come in particular from the Gulf region.
Dan, let me perhaps put the same question to you. And to what extent, the perception in Israel is that you will need to have continued U.S. and international community focus on still some of the objectives that the Israeli Prime Minister would like to achieve, including Hamas disarmament?
Well, very much so, but I think the Israelis, to a degree, would like to eat their cake and have it too, in that the Israeli policy has long been to avoid, to prevent what Israel calls an internationalization of a conflict, meaning giving an international body, peacekeepers and the like, much of a purchase, much of a foothold in a conflict zone where Israel would like to retain autonomy, the possibility of unilateral action, including military action. Nonetheless, I think Israelis will recognize that there is a limit to military action in the Gaza Strip. I think it's one of the reasons they agreed to this deal at this juncture 2 years into it. And as Stuart noted, the economic burden, the simple logistical burden, the excavation burden that lies ahead is truly enormous. It would require expertise. It would require enormous sums for a long time to go, years and years of planning and work. And that clearly needs a buy-in from regional stakeholders. It'll be expensive, but these are people who were troubled for 2 years by the destabilizing effects of the conflict. So they might do a calculation that that sort of investment is a very happy trade-off when it comes to the possibility or the alternative of further destabilization.
Dan Williams and Stuart Livingston-Wallace, thank you both so much for a recap of what was an extraordinary day in the region yesterday. Now, coming up, we'll talk to Philip Bahoshy, founder and CEO of MAGNiTT, as venture capital funding in the Middle East region surpasses Southeast Asia for the first time. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Venture capital funding in the Middle East and North Africa region had a record-breaking performance in the first 9 months of 2025, raising over $3 billion. That is the first time the region's funding has surpassed that of Southeast Asia. Joining me now is Philip Bahoshy, founder and CEO of MAGNiTT. So that's the tally for the 9 months. But I also note in your report that the third quarter actually marked the region's strongest quarter ever, with $1.2 billion raised. Why did that happen? Was it pent-up demand from the second quarter? I remember the last time you were on, we were talking about the uncertainty around tariffs and how that was all going to play out.
Absolutely. I mean, historically, the summer has always been a period of slowdown.
Yeah.
And the last time we were here, we were saying really that the tell will be whether the summer succeeds. And we've seen a record amount of capital. I think you're basically seeing the private markets catch up with what's happening in the public markets. We're beginning to see the euphoria of record highs across the globe in terms of the public markets. And now private capital is seeing both regional and international investors' appetite for the regional private capital space. One
other interesting stat was that a lot of this activity was actually driven by mega deals, i.e. large deals. I don't know what the cutoff is for your definition for mega, but why is that happening? Is it because companies are staying private for longer? Is it because of the availability of capital? Or what is going on to finance some of these bigger deals?
So a mega deal in our report is basically an investment deal that's greater than $100 million to kind of separate large investment deals versus the underlying ecosystem. I've been a big proponent that once interest rates start coming down, you see that late-stage capital becomes a lot more attractive. Why? Predominantly for two reasons. Cost of capital becomes cheaper, so investors are more likely to allocate. And then the likelihood of another round after that, or the potential for exit, becomes a lot more attractive.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's a sign of interest and risk appetite for later stage investments and growth capital over early stage investments in the ecosystem.
Yeah. And is that the same situation for earlier on in the cycle, Series A and Series B funding? What are you seeing there?
I think it's across the board that you're seeing that the appetite is returning to venture as an asset class, both from the international community and the regional community, and that has resulted in these record numbers. Ultimately, to achieve record growth, you need the underlying ecosystem to grow as well as the late stage investment capital.
Okay, so how does the Middle East compare to what's been happening globally with some of these broader trends? I was actually moderating a global deal-making panel a couple of weeks ago in London, and the ladies on the panel were saying that things have massively ramped up just in the last couple of weeks. Also, the size of the deals are getting bigger and bigger. How does this region compare to the rest of the world?
I think one of the benefits that we have is that we can actually foretell the future by seeing what happens globally, and then it starts happening here. And effectively, right. The trends that we've seen from global benchmarks were already kicking in the latter half of last year, and we're now seeing that parallel into the ecosystem here. That delay in reporting that we really tried to fix at MAGNiTT is something that we're very dear to, but we're now seeing that pickup of activity. Okay. I think one thing interesting to note, though, is it's very concentrated in the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Saudi Arabia is saying had the most deals for the first time in the quarter. This must be this 9 months of the year, 173, right? Yep. That's for the first 9 months. One of my colleagues, Laura, has written a story about how the PIF are slowing down some of their IPO activity, the share sales in the market. What sort of trickle-down effect would that have to the ecosystem, do you think?
I think that in the IPO world, the tech area is extremely hot right now. I mean, we just saw Dubizzle here potentially looking to list in the UAE. Saudi Arabia has many companies that are looking to list. Having said that, many of them are preparing to list. Now, we don't know how long that preparation process takes place. I think that PIF is the anchor investor in Jeddah, which is the fund of funds, along with SVC in the kingdom. But the appetite for exits remains probably the largest, not necessarily red flag, but orange flag for the ecosystem. And the need for liquidity to pay back many of the investors, founders, and the governments that are really invested into the space is key.
And how do you read some of the decisions that we've been reporting on at Bloomberg recently, that the CMA are considering changes to lift the cap on foreign ownership of stocks? I mean, again, I know this pertains to the public markets, but does that all help the broader ecosystem? Absolutely.
As someone who's been following the public markets myself, you've seen the uplift in Saudi Arabia, which has been lagging many of the regional markets. In terms of tech IPOs, I think there's a couple of things. Capital gains is something that keeps getting repeated as a big challenge for companies that are listed or looking to list in Saudi Arabia. But the openness for foreign investment really will catalyze the growth of companies transitioning from private markets into public markets, specifically in Saudi. Yeah. Phil, always good to have you on. Thank you so much for bringing us your report. That was Philip Bahoshy, founder and CEO of MAGNiTT. And coming up, Mauritius Commercial Bank says it remains committed to its Madagascar business despite the current unrest. That conversation next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Johanna Bersace in Dubai. The CEO of Mauritius Commercial Bank says the company remains committed to its Madagascar business despite the current unrest. Thierry Hebraud told us there is still plenty of opportunity for growth across Africa.
Our capacity of development in our own country is more driven by our country itself than by gaining market share, although we can certainly develop more cross-selling, more flows business, from more financial market business in our own country, but that has a limit. When you take the continent, I mean, the huge potential of the continent is offering us a real capacity of growth where there is room for everyone. Again, I repeat, international banks, for the vast majority, have left the continent. They have their reasons for that. I think it's not there are not good reasons. I think it's a little bit stupid from their side, but we can understand it, and that leave a lot of space for regional banks like us, or South African banks, or some Nigerian banks, for example, or multilateral banks, to position ourselves in this market where everything is to be done, and we need everybody around the table. There is room for really everybody around the table in this African environment and ecosystem.
I was going to say, how much concern do you have when you look at the events in one of your main markets, Madagascar, especially if you consider some of the growth that is coming there? How much concern does the unrest that we're seeing leave you?
Of course, it's a concern. At the same time, if we take the history of Madagascar over probably the last 50 or 60 years, this country has gone through hiccups and has recovered each time, although has suffered tremendously from these regular difficulties and unrest. This is not, today it's a concern for our people, for our staff, of course, and we are very cautious about that, but we do not believe that will change drastically the country for the next few months and years. So our strategy to be in Madagascar remains exactly the same.
MCB Bank CEO Thierry Hebraud speaking with Bloomberg's Jennifer Zabazaja. Now for a look at some of the other stories we're following today. Airbus is opening new assembly lines in Alabama and China to boost output of its best-selling A320neo jets. Engine issues have forced the company to build gliders or planes completed without engines. Airbus aims to build 75 aircraft a month by 2027 as it works through a backlog of more than 7,000 orders. SpaceX's Starship has deployed test satellites in space and returned to Earth largely intact, and a major win for the company. The flight repeated several successes from August, with the Super Heavy booster separating and firing its engines to position itself for the landing. The mission marks a big step towards SpaceX's goal of turning Starship into a landing vehicle for future moon missions. And a quick look at equity futures. Things are turning south as the heat rises between China and the U.S. with some new sanctions from China imposing curbs on 5 of Huawei Ocean's U.S. units. So that's the reason that we're seeing a big decline in equity futures. And that is it for our show, Horizons Middle East and Africa.